But what times do you guys think, looking back over the last 250 years, what times do you think post-Revolutionary War, post-independence, you look back and go, we barely made it?
I don't know, Stephen, what was it like in the Civil War?
He's our elder, but he's not that elder.
Those muskets were heavy.
They were heavy. This is a great question, guys.
Well, I want to say that there are many incidences. Obviously, the Civil War was a very challenging time, but to me, I think that the most dangerous time is that which was not recognized as a dangerous time. I would say, in particular, the rise of secularism in the nation is what happened. A fundamental question Americans should be asking, every nation should be asking, is who is the source of the law of your society? It's fundamental because the source of the law of a society is the God of that society. The source of law in America was the Bible. It's easy to show, read the early laws, constitutions. It's certainly true. But what happened gradually, for a lot of different reasons, we began to shift. No longer do we look to the absolutes of God's Word, the Creator, as our founders did. We began to look to man. And in the 1920s, a guy named Roscoe Pound was the president of Harvard Law School. And he recognized the Christian foundation of law. He did not attack it directly, but this is what he did in his book, The Spirit of Common Law. He said, yeah, Christianity's been good, that ancient law, to get us to this point, but it only can take us so far. If we're going to continue to advance, we need to come up with a different foundation, a different set. So what he suggested is that we need the consensus of man to determine what our law is going to be. And he said that in this condition, the state takes the place of Jehovah. And that's what's happened. We have cast aside the absolutes of God's law. We have embraced man's law, or as that Chief Justice said back in the 1930s, the Constitution is whatever we say it is. And we've looked to the wisdom of man. We will decide what's right or wrong. We will decide what's moral or immoral, lawful or unlawful. That is the greatest danger that we are facing and battling today, and most Americans don't even know it's a danger. And if we don't deal with that, we'll never turn the nation around and see the vision that the founders had for building a free society succeed.
It's actually the greatest threat to us, unfortunately, potentially fulfilling what Rabbi Daniel Lapin talks about this all the time. Most great cultures and societies fall apart at 250. So here we are at our 250th. It's about 240 to 260. And we're at our 250th. And if we fall apart, it's going to be because we went towards this. Everybody decide for yourself what's right or wrong. Your feelings matter more than the facts. And it causes everything to decay. So we really do have a chance to revive those foundations that made us last 250 years in the first place, if we remember what they are. But I think what you're getting at is the hope that we need to know that we can overcome this great threat before us. And certainly we've had times, honestly, you think about the Civil War, we're literally brother is shooting brother. We're at war in the streets. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying. I'm sure they had days where they thought, this is not going to last. There's one reason I rank Lincoln as the second most important president, because he did hold it together in what was our most difficult time. But I think today, what you just said is the real threat.
Yeah. Well, and people don't view it, some people don't view it as a threat because there's not blood in the streets.
Right.
It's
why Islam now is a cultural jihad, not a kinetic jihad. In other words, they're not going to be, trying to do suicide vest right now. What they're going to do is try to take us over from the inside.
But the end result of this secular humanism is the same as having a bloody war over communism.
Well, and even because of secular humanism, that has actually led us to some of the cultural Marxism, which is what BLM riots were about. It's what some of the riots right now we've seen in Minnesota, right? Earlier in the year, the reason that has existed is because of the secular humanism, the cultural Marxism that's come in. And so it's not a lot different than looking back and seeing some of, maybe your Boston Massacre kind of things. Now, I would obviously say that they were on a totally different side than what goes on, but in the sense of bloodshed in the streets, we're not an open, armed combat between militaries, which is ultimately what happened in the Civil War, but it's not that dissimilar from some of the other moments we've seen. And Stephen, I think you're exactly right. The greatest threat now is that most people have no idea we're in the middle of a cultural war. So that's incredibly important. But Walker, I think maybe to put a little bow on some of, maybe I think we're kind of what you're pointing out, the question might be is, have we navigated times like this before? It's worth noting that there are many moments where America's been incredibly divided, maybe not more divided outwardly apparent than the Civil War, but what's also there's an interesting parallel that happens. Historically, every 20, 30, 40, 50 years, there is a major move of God in America where there's a major revival in America. And what's interesting is that some of the most divided and secular moments in America are in the middle of major revivals. It's really interesting because the easiest example I'll give first, but then I'll give a couple others. If you go to the Second Great Awakening, arguably 1800 till about the Civil War, right, is arguably Second Great Awakening time. This is when Charles Finney in the 1820s and 30s, he's the most noted evangelist from the Second Great Awakening. He was incredibly useful in God's kingdom, the way we might evaluate that. But there was 1 year alone where more than 100,000 people converted to Christianity under his ministry and leadership. So the guy's amazing. Well, in the midst of his ministry, the 1820s and 30s, it's also one of the most politically divided times we've ever been in America. And it's so divided that in the 1830s, starting then to the 1840s, every major denomination in America split in the midst of a revival, which is interesting because one of the things historically we can document is that some of the greatest times of division also parallel some of the greatest moving of God. And the reason this is important is because anytime God's on the move, we know the devil is trying to counter God's move. And what's kind of worth addressing in this, First Great Awakening wasn't times of unity. George Whitefield, the most noted leader, he wasn't invited to speak in hardly any churches his first 2 decades of ministry. People saw him as a threat. And so he would go play, we don't want that guy here. America was a divided nation. The First Great Awakening brought unity. The Second Great Awakening, very similar, brought unity, but it brought unity after great conflict. But what's interesting about like the First or Second Great Awakening, God's move, it was not a move of unity, it was a move of clarity. Where truth and morality were debated, ultimately truth and morality prevailed, but it prevailed after incredible conflict, incredible division. Again, because God was moving, but the devil was moving. But I think what's encouraging now is it's not real dissimilar from the First and Second Great Awakening, where America was divided. I mean, we're seeing riots in the streets. I mean, newsflash, right? Go back to the 1830s and 40s, bloody Kansas. There were some really rough times. Yeah. In the midst of some amazing revivals, but two things were true at once. God was on the move. There was a counter push by the devil, but because people were being discipled, the people that were discipled were able to overcome the spiritual opposition of what was going on. And I think that's where we are, but only if we can emphasize discipleship, which is why I want to bring this up, because for everybody watching and listening, This is a big deal for us, that we don't just focus on teaching people who Jesus is, but maybe teaching them more how to live like Jesus. That discipleship application becomes far more important. And I think that's why when I look where we are historically, I'm not as discouraged as some people are. Partly also, I think if you read Numbers, you should always go, I'm going to be Joshua and Caleb, not the other 10 people. We don't even know their names, right? Like there's always a God who can overcome the giants of the land. Yeah. So we always want to believe in that God, and we want to have that mindset of Joshua and Caleb. With that being said, I think there's reasons historically to be optimistic because I think we're seeing more discipleship efforts now than we have in more recent outpourings of God over the last 150 years. So there's a reason to be encouraged, even though we're in the middle of one of the greatest spiritual battles, and we need to recognize it so we know how to disciple. We're discipling against secular humanism and recognizing where our liberty came from. Maybe we should educate people for liberty.
Well, and I can tell you these young people are hungry for it. I mean, the movie you just made, the things that are coming out right now, and the effort to disciple the timing is obviously God's timing is always perfect, but there's just something happened. There's something special happening. They don't want the empty, shallow thing. They want to be discipled, and for the gospel to apply to everything in life. You know, it really is the boxing of God into just the spiritual arena, or maybe my family, maybe my salvation, but not how I treat my neighbor. And now we're getting back to this full gospel. Everything we do in life, how we run our business, how we vote,
affects everything.
It affects everything, and that's what these kids are hungry for. And it's there is. I truly believe we're in a revival. I think these young people are going to lead it. I get to see them in action. I got to add, we've talked presidents, we've talked tough times. You know, Reagan in his first speech as a public official, in his inaugural address as governor in '67, is when he said that famous line, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We don't pass it in the bloodstream." But then he ended his public career at the very end in his farewell address in January of '89. That's when he said, if we forget what we did, we won't know who we are. And he warned of an eradication of the American memory that would lead to an erosion of the American spirit. This special that you're doing on the 250 is our chance to do what he said was the solution, which is civic ritual. This is civic ritual right here.
Yeah.
We're literally reminding ourselves, almost like Stephen getting up and giving the speech. Now, there's some people maybe want to stone us. Don't do that. But we're literally having the civic ritual of reminding ourselves who we are and where we came from, so that we can restore that American spirit. And I see really positive signs out there. I think what you're saying is exactly right. I think the response to what you're doing, I mean, this is our moment. I think God has literally placed American Family Association, Patriot Academy, Providence Family, Wall Builders, all these different organizations. For how long? We've been doing this 30, 40 years for this moment. I really believe that. The 250 is what he's been preparing us for. It's going to be amazing.